So, as I mentioned a little bit ago, this week has probably been one of the hardest weeks for me in ministry when it comes to just feeling the weight of what is being addressed. As we're going through Genesis, we've had 2 chapters of fun and beauty and perfection, and now we get to this 3rd chapter where the watershed moment for every awful thing that has ever happened to you is drawn from. And we see what our first parents, who lived in this beautiful, perfect estate and dwelt with God free from any defect or corruption, decided, hey, it would be a really good idea to not do this anymore. Now, there are a lot of things that can be said about this, okay? And so this morning, as we look at these first 7 verses, bear in mind that next week we will address verses 8 through following there as the curse of sin comes upon humanity. So we're not going to necessarily talk this morning about the effects of sin necessarily, but what I do want to draw your attention to here is really a pathology of sin. Okay, considering what sin really is as it shows up for the first time in human history, as Adam and Eve are there and they are tempted, and what it is they're tempted by, because we see the same pattern show up, and the Apostle John writes his first letter, that the same kind of threefold mess that sin carries with it is brought up by John in 1 John chapter 2. And so this is not something that's isolated to this first time in human history where it enters in. This is something that goes throughout the course of history as a thread that's woven through everything. And so I desire this morning for you, as we see this show up for the first time, that you'd be able to trace this pathology, you'd understand what this is about, and you'd look in your own heart and see that, yes, when sin is knocking at the door, it is presenting the same promises, it is presenting the same temptation that our first parents experienced at the hands of the devil. So a little levity for you. Perhaps you grew up reading a book like I did, which is Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Well, this is the par excellence of the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, and it is Adam and Eve and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day in Genesis chapter 3. So I will read verses 1 through 7 for us, and then we will get to our big idea for the morning. Now, the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. But God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths." So again, many things could be said about this. Many things could be said. And so our focus this morning is going to rest on this particular thing, this big idea that I have for you, because I think it is a helpful condensing of when we see sin show up, how this can kind of like locate itself in your heart, locate itself in your experience, so that when you think about the fall, you think that there is nothing new under the sun. So when this enters in, and you see what rebellion against God looks like, what transgression looks like, that you are well aware that this first sin to the very last one until the Lord Jesus returns follow a similar pattern. And it is primarily found in this, that when we sin, we are rebelling against God, right? Sin is always a personal transgression. It is not an impersonal action, right? When David says, "Against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight," what he's effectively saying is this: no matter what my sin does and how it affects other people, at the end of the day, my sin is against God personally. Right? Because we have a personal God. He's not an impersonal force. He's not this kind of removed watchmaker who sets things in motion and says, "Oh, here you go, have fun. I might show up at some point." God is intimately involved with the world that he created. And so when sin shows up, it is always a personal transgression. It's always saying, God, I see that this is more desirable than you, and so I'm going to pursue this instead. This is what the conscience is bearing witness to, even if we might not be able to locate it in those exact words. The conscience is saying, I've done wrong. There's something I've done that is not according to the way I should have done it. And what this reveals is that this image of God that we've seen for the past handful of weeks, reflected in the creation of humanity, what's happening here is that image of God. It's just there's this heartbeat that desires, right, in the original created order, this heartbeat that desires the God who made man and woman, and yet that is corrupted. And so now it's beating in a certain rhythm, and it realizes it shouldn't beat in this rhythm, but it can't help itself. It's like there's something wrong. It's a personal transgression. We're sinning against God under our belt. And so knowing this, knowing that sin is this personal transgression, I want you to locate it in these terms of rebelling, okay? Rebelling against God. That's what sin is. It's what Adam and Eve do here. They are told by God, do not do this one thing. I've given you all of these things to enjoy, but there is this one thing you ought not to do, which is do not seek to take my place from me. And rebellion then ensues. So your big idea for the morning is this. The entrance of sin into the world came with a promise that rebellion against God feels good, it looks good, and enables us to establish good on our own. So please be aware of this. Sin always makes promises. It always makes promises. Temptation, when it knocks on your door, makes a promise to you that to pursue X will result in greater pleasure than not pursuing X. And these promises are made to the point of when we get to Romans 1, we'll look at that a little bit later on. Romans chapter 1, Paul reflects on the degradation of the human heart throughout history. And it says these promises are made, and it seems completely irrational, completely illogical that people would pursue some of these things that are so destructive and have been shown to be destructive, and yet it's just we desire, we can't help ourselves because this promise is there saying, this is good, you should pursue this, you should go after this, and it is good for you to do this. And so sin says, like, here are these good things, you should go after them. And promises are made, and we follow those, and we believe those promises. And until the Lord, in sovereign grace and mercy, breaks our heart free from a love for self and rebellion against him, we are in bondage to our love of these promises. So, I'm going to start with a lie. I usually have 3 points in my sermons. We're going with 2 points with 3 subheaders. So get ready to write things down a little differently than you might. So verses 1 through 5 again. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, I want you to trace how, again, promises get made. Because at this point, Adam and Eve are unfallen. They have the opportunity here to sin. They also have the opportunity to not sin. And so a promise gets made. I want you to think about the promise that gets made here by the serpent to Eve and Adam, who was standing passively by. Did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, here is the promise. You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So here's the big promise, which is really a big lie. The initial promise of sin is the thread that runs through all temptation. Humanity can determine for itself what is right and wrong apart from God and his word. So this is something that is, as we talk about these goods, and we're going to see these 3 goods that show up here that Eve looks like, oh, this sounds like a good thing. This is what stands really over all of it. So if the fruit of this tree is, looks really good, seems to taste really good, if I eat it, it's going to be really a good, nourishing thing for me, and it's going to give me the ability to establish my own good. What stands over all of this is this promise that if you seek to take God's place, if you seek to rebel against God, that what you can do is this godlike task of determining for yourself what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. Right? This seems like if you really put it, like this is a God-like task. Like who can determine what is good and evil? Who can determine that? Can you, can I, can we just decide one day to sit down and say, all right, I'm going to come up with a list of ethical do's and don'ts, things that are going to be good, things that are going to be bad, and I'm just going to say this is good because I say so. Some sense of like human fiat. It's like I'm going to say good and it's good. It seems like a pretty divine task. And yet we see these first like illogical movements, these irrational movements of sin, where we look at the God who created, who spoke, and it came to be. We say, I think there is a better candidate to interpret the design for what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, than the one who made. Instead, it is me. And it doesn't take much for us to kind of survey the landscape of our culture and to see, like, is this alive today? Is this impulse alive today? Is it true? Is it true that if sin operates like this, is it true that humanity reflects this? And it doesn't take much. Friends, it doesn't take much. Just look around and to see the person who says, I like this. This is good for me. Might not be good for you, but it's good for me. This is bad for you, it's good for me. How we just seek to establish for ourselves what's right and wrong based on what we want, what we desire. And this is the initial impulse of sin giving into the promise that's made. So here, the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now, it is kind of, it might appear to be that what Satan is saying here to Eve, to Adam, is that if you eat of this, you're just going to know the difference between right and wrong. Okay? At first glance, it might seem like, oh, he's just saying you know the difference between right and wrong. Is that really a bad thing? Right? Is it wrong for you to know the difference between right and wrong? Well, no, of course it's not. But that's not what is being offered here. What's being offered by the serpent at this point is to say, Eve, Adam, if you reach out for this, if you reach out, if you take this, what's going to happen is you will be telling the God who made you that I can determine, right? The word know here doesn't mean just intellectually know. This means an intimate knowing, that you will be able to know good and evil. You will determine it for yourself. And God knows that if you reach out and take this, and he doesn't want you to take that place, right? He doesn't want you to do that. And he's so jealous for that position. He just doesn't want that for you. But what's best for you is that you take this for yourself. That's the promise here. That's what's being communicated to Eve and to Adam as they are in the garden. What's being communicated is that, this God, he just wants to keep you down. He wants to keep you with his thumb on you, and you could just as easily become like him. As we look forward here, Proverbs 14, we hear there's a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. And so if we think, like, what does this mean in experience? Right? If this is a kind of a punctuation mark in Scripture that's saying, hey, you know what? You might be walking around day in and day out and have some ideas about how things ought to be. But please know this, the writer of Proverbs would say, please know this, that even though something might seem right to you, that if it's only right to you, its end is the way to death. Right? This is just hearkening back to this initial promise. Death was the result of the first sin. And the writer of Proverbs is saying, in regular experience, right? Proverbs is a practical book that tells us ways that people ought to live that are wise and unwise. And so the author is saying here that just because you think something is right doesn't make it right. Just because you feel like something is right doesn't mean that it's right. Instead, there is an author to life, there's a designer to life who made everything and who upholds everything and who sustains everything. And in his design has said, this is good And this is bad, and you ought to listen to me because I know what is good and what is bad. And when you look at the experience, the human experience of sin, and we think, what is it that sin has done to people? Has it ever benefited anybody ultimately? The answer is no. You think of what happened in the 1960s, the sexual revolution. The idea here is very much like an Eden-like experience of saying, we're going to cast off these restraints from us. We're going to go out and we're going to pursue something and establish for ourselves our own sexual ethic. This happens in the 60s. And so the idea is, let's do this. And it seems cool for a few years, right? Woodstock happens. People are doing all kinds of stuff. Oh, how fun. And then the 70s hits. And what happens? But people are so burned out. They're so devastated by the effects of this. They're hollow and thinking, what is this everything? Is this everything? And then we see things like AIDS and disease that come along with this. We think, like, what is attached to sin? What is attached to sin is destruction. What is attached to sin is death. It did not benefit anybody to go out and break sexual ethics and create their own. All kinds of consequences came with it. And from the kind of littlest thing that you might experience on a day-to-day basis to these grand movements of culture, what happens every single time is the promise that this is going to be good for you. If you seek to establish for yourself a righteousness that says, this is good for me, I don't need anybody to tell me that it's wrong, it will inevitably harm you. Judges chapter 1, verse 25, the author of Judges says this, very last verse of the book, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now, this is not a commendation of their culture. As Judges unfolds, you see these cycles of time and again. This is after Moses had led the people through the wilderness and Joshua had taken them into the promised land. And as they go into Canaan, there is nobody ruling over them. And they've taken possession of the land, but everybody's kind of doing whatever they feel like doing, whatever they want to do, whatever they think is right. And over again, God graciously preserves them by sending these judges who will basically like rein people in and restrain them from becoming the worst possible version of themselves. And so the book ends on this note. There's no ruler, right? Because the people were told, as they're given the law, don't seek to establish a king for yourself, because God himself is your king. They threw that off. And they wanted to be like the nations around them, so they threw off God's authority, again, rebelling against God's authority, and here they just go around, do whatever is right in their own eyes. This is not a commendation. This is not like, what a free people. This is a people who were enslaved. Romans chapter 6, Paul says, do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness? Years and years ago, when I was in campus ministry, my campus director, who was probably, 15 years older than me, 20 years older than me. Really great guy named Jim. And Jim, actually, I remember this is probably like 2003, 2004. Jim gave this message at our weekly meeting, and he quoted a Bob Dylan song. I'm not a Bob Dylan fan at all, but this Bob Dylan song was like, you got to serve somebody. You might know it. If you're older than me, you probably know it. You got to serve somebody. And that stuck with me. It stuck with me because when you think about what Paul's saying in Romans 6, it's saying like, whoever you're going to kind of submit to and say, I believe you, I trust you, you're saying, I'm going to follow you. And the funny thing about sin is that even though the promise comes to say, if you do this, you're going to be God. You're going to be the one who is calling the shots. You think, is that really true? Is it really true that when you give yourself over to a love for something other than the God who made you, is it really true that you are free? Or is it instead true that that thing owns you? That thing becomes that which dominates your affections and your life. And Paul's simply saying, don't you know that your affections, you link them up to somebody, you're going to do what they say? And so really, the promise of sin is just this very deceitful, insidious thing, because really, there's not a promise of freedom. It's just a different type of enslavement. Ecclesiastes 7:25. Solomon says, I turn my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And verse 29, see, this alone I've found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. So as Solomon surveys the landscape of human experience, he looks and he says, look, I've made it my aim to see, how's this working? How do people work? What do they love and what happens with what they love? And Solomon says, foolishness, wickedness is madness. There is nothing rational about it. There is nothing logical about it. You can see this in what's called like the New Atheist Movement. At least it used to be called that when it was a New Atheist Movement, with guys like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. These guys who decided, you know what, let's go ahead here and we're going to be as rational and scientific as possible. And as this movement played out, what you found is that the supposed rationalism led to things like ethical nihilism. Like, well, I guess if nobody says what's right and wrong above us, outside of us, I guess the best we can do is try to come up with what's best for the most people. And if that's the case, take a look at any given culture. And what's the best for this people within this culture? And you get to genocide pretty quickly. There's nothing logical, there's nothing rational about determining our own course. It is madness, as Solomon says. And he says mankind has sought out many schemes, meaning we've all tried to do things a lot of different ways, and the end result is always the same. It is always absolute insanity. Sin is crazy. So that's the promise that's made to us, that we can establish right and wrong for ourselves as a race, to say, yes, humanity is good and evil on our own terms, and forget the God who made us. So then we see here the goods of sin. And now there are three things, as I said, three things that are held out for us here. I think generally speaking, this is representative of how sin kind of comes to us and how it knocks on our door, how temptation shows up. Now this isn't a zeroed in detail of every single temptation you will ever face, but I do think that we can categorize temptation pretty easily into these three categories. Verses 6 through 7, again, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, now there's this threefold thing that shows up here. Good for food, delights of the eyes, and that the tree was desired to make one wise. Three things. She took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. Now, this whole nakedness, shame dynamic we're going to talk about next week. But it is crucial for us to understand that these promises that get made by sin, we can kind of break them down. So broadly speaking, sin promises to deliver on the promise of three goods: to feel good, to look good, and to establish good apart from God. So if you think about temptation when it comes knocking at your door, it can probably fit into one of these three categories. If you pursue this, you will feel good. If you pursue this, do it because it looks good, it looks better than God, or it makes you look better. Or if you pursue this, you can establish good apart from God. 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, as I indicated earlier, this is where the Apostle John takes up this theme. It says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Now, does this mean that you are not to love people because they're in the world? Absolutely not. John is saying here, he's using Johannine language to talk about the cosmos, all right? The world under the dominion of sin. It says, do not love the world. He's saying that order that is disorder, that order that exists that says, I have thrown off God's rule and his dominion and his reign, and instead, I'm going to do this on my own. Okay, that's the world that's being spoken of here by John. So he says, for all that is in the world, now see if you can line these three things up with what's presented in this promise to Eve and Adam. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. So as John is caring for these people, he is writing to, he's caring for you and caring for me. He's saying, run away from these things that will destroy you. Run away from these things that will bring you into a place of misery. He's saying, don't ever confuse the things that accord with death with the things that come from the God of life. Don't ever confuse these things. Don't ever believe that you will benefit, that it is God's good for you to pursue these things. And so think, as Eve and Adam are standing there, and Eve is contemplating. She's thinking about this tree and the fruit that is on this tree. Says the fruit looks good for food. Desires of the flesh. Feels good. It's a good thing to behold, beautiful thing to behold, right? This is what Eve is thinking about with this, the desires of the eyes. It looks good. And then the tree, the fruit of the tree, desire to make one wise. That's the pride of life. That is a self-centered, arrogant attitude that exalts ourselves in the place of God. Let's talk about each of these three for a minute here. Jude, verses 10 through 13. This is a colorful passage, very colorful passage, and I think it's probably self-explanatory when it comes to what is being spoken of here, so I'll reserve comment till after I read it. These people blaspheme all that they do not understand. Jude is speaking about people who creep into the church and make these promises, right? That John is saying, avoid, avoid, avoid. This is not from God. And Jude is saying, yes, these types of people exist, and indeed they actually show up in the church. These people blaspheme all that they do not understand, and they are destroyed by all that they, like unreasoning animals, understand instinctively. Woe to them. For they walked in the way of Cain and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error and perished in Korah's rebellion. These are hidden reefs at your love feasts as they feast with you without fear, shepherds feeding themselves, waterless clouds swept along by winds, fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead, uprooted, wild waves of the sea, casting up the foam of their own shame, wandering stars for whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever. Again, this is very colorful language. And what is happening here is Jude is repeatedly drawing from Old Testament pictures saying, hey, and remember this, and remember this, and remember this. These are not good things. These are really bad things. You think about Korah's rebellion. The people got judged for that. It was a pretty severe thing. Not a good experience. The way of Cain, murder, sin's crouching at the door, right? God says, Cain, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is to have you. You must rule over it. Cain says, no. And Balaam's error, to forsake the good in order to exalt yourself. I mean, these things over and over, these pictures are given for us, as Jude is saying, don't play around with sin. Don't treat it like it's a small thing. Don't entertain it in the life of the church. And this doesn't mean that we need to examine everybody coming through the door as some type of like acolyte squad who asks, like, have you sinned yesterday or the day? That's not what it means. What it does mean, though, is that genuine Christian people care about their walk with God. They care enough about their walk with God to say, I don't want to do what displeases him. And so, yes, you have sinned this past week. I have sinned this past week. But the question to ask yourself is, am I the type of person who shows up, as these people do, shows up in corporate worship, and I'm just more concerned with, like, I'm going to feel my way through life, I'm going to enjoy as much as I can of sin, and I'm going to kind of like work my way around and to feel good about myself by saying, Jesus is cool with this. He's great with this, right? Like he died for sinners, and that means I can just keep sinning. That's not how it works. There's a new pleasure introduced to the human soul when new life is given. That's a pleasure that says, my greatest good is in God. That I can even deny physical pleasure to pursue pleasure in God. Galatians 5, Paul gives this list. It's an ethical list. What does it look like to live a life that's opposed to the God who made you? He says, the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. This word for flesh is used repeatedly throughout the New Testament, and specifically in Paul, to denote the type of life that is concerned with the mentality of, let's eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. I really don't care what God has to say. I really don't care about the pleasures that are at God's right hand. The only thing I really care about is, can God feed my appetites? The only thing I really care about is can God underwrite my pursuit of what feels good in life? If he can do that, then I'm all for it. This is one of the reasons why the prosperity gospel is no gospel, why it's abominable, is because it makes God the underwriter of greed. And John says, to love the world is idolatry. God doesn't underwrite idolatry. In Proverbs, you find the writer saying that, give me poverty nor riches. Don't give me extremes on either end, because the temptation for me is, if I have poverty, I'm going to go and steal stuff. The temptation is, I have all kinds of riches, to say, I forget God. The Christian experience should be one that says, I am content. I am content that God is my treasure and he will give me what I need, right? Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you. The things we worry about, the things that we desire, the things that take up our affections so often, that lead us into these types of things that Paul says are contrary to a new life, are rooted in this desire to feel good. I'm going to feel good. So looking good. Proverbs 6:12 through 15. A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech, winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, points with his finger, with perverted heart devises evil, continually sowing discord. Therefore calamity will come upon him suddenly. In a moment he will be broken beyond healing. So I bring this up here so that we can get an idea of what it is to pursue an appearance-based life. A life that says what matters most is to look the part of desire. To look the part that says, I am desirable. I want you to desire me, or I desire other things because they're desirable apart from God. And the author of Proverbs says that the type of person, just think about this type of individual. This is the smooth talker. This is the schmoozer. This is the person who paints a picture of himself that is consistently desirable, regardless of what the truth of the matter really is. It's just the person who goes and it's kind of the slick back hair, the nice suit. And it's just, don't you want to be like me? Don't you? It's good to the appearance. Matthew chapter 23, Jesus talks about how this shows up in religious experience, in spiritual experience. This is what it looks like for somebody to not just be a smooth talker when it comes to being the wheeler and dealer salesman. Appearance matters most. But in spiritual experience, Jesus condemns people in Matthew 23 who cared mostly about what others thought. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee! First clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So sin comes to us, and it knocks on the door and says, here's a good for you to pursue. Just look good. Just look really good. Right? It might be a strange concept to some of us to think that God is beautiful, but God is beautiful. God is genuinely beautiful. A lot of times we just associate with the Vogue magazine cover. That's a kind of beauty. but it's not genuine beauty in the sense that God is beautiful. To behold God is to behold absolute perfection. I think that sin comes and knocks on the door and says, here's a suitable substitute for that. Here's a suitable substitute. Make your own beauty. Make it and make others like it. Make others love it. Make others pursue it. And then chase after that yourself. This past week, I was really bothered, really disturbed, like deeply disturbed over the revelation of a man that I grew up in my teens listening to, a prominent Christian musician who had done this quite well for many years. It came out that he was living a life completely contrary to his profession of faith. Who was the face of a lot of Christian movies. This came out, this individual had just looked the part and behind the scenes had lived a life that was all about self-glorification. And a heart that had been hardened and hardened and hardened so that he couldn't even distinguish the hypocrisy that he had been engaged in. And I was bothered by this, but what I reflected on as I thought about this is that, is this not like one of the liabilities that we face in modern evangelicalism? One of our liabilities is that we have this kind of celebrianity, where we think, oh, if it looks good, if it is big and beautiful and shiny, it must be good. Pay no attention to the small. Pay no attention to the unassuming. You pay attention to the big, the beautiful, and that is clearly of God. Be warned. Just because something looks good doesn't make it good. So finally, establish a good, which is probably the most insidious thing of all. Isaiah chapter 5, the prophet records these words, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight." As God is giving us these words, this is, to be clear, Isaiah is speaking to a religious people here. Isaiah is not speaking to pagans, because in Scripture, this is just a given. Well, of course, if you've thrown off God's leadership in name, the kind of life you're going to live is going to exchange good for evil all the time. But what's really, really heinous about this, what's insidious about this, is that Isaiah is speaking words to a people who had said, hey, you know what? Evil's good, and God says it's okay. Let's get creative. Let's decide for ourselves what is good and what might seem culturally appropriate. People around us like these things. That's kind of, it's make a little list of things that might make us more desirable to the people around us. Let's make a little list of things that might be more easy for us, more comfortable for us. And then let's submit that as this type of bill of goods to God and say, hey, just put your seal of approval on this. Put your seal of approval. And now God says this is good. God says, woe to those. Woe. Woe to those. And this is not a small word. It's a little word, 3 letters, woe. But it's not a small word. Because it's a word that expresses God's absolute displeasure. If you think for a second that God is the one who will underwrite your or my desire to say what is evil is actually good, it is not going to end well. And yet the promise of sin is that if you just kind of just take a bite of this, just reach out, grab it, and decide for yourself, well, it'll be liberating for you. Proverbs 26, verse 12, "Do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him." So just think, you see a man who is wise in his own eyes. What does this say? This says that pride is the biggest barricade of the human heart. And by pride, I mean our desire to justify our own actions contrary to everything we know to be true about God and His Word. Pride is the most serious and significant sin. It's what stands behind self-righteousness that Jesus condemns repeatedly. It's what stands behind self-exaltation and self-glorification, is to say, you know what, I see this and it's desired to make me wise. I see this, it is the boastful pride of life. I will be on top. I will be the one who is exalted, and don't you dare challenge me. And the writer of Proverbs says, there's more hope for an idiot than this person. Well-known Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. So going back to 1 John 2:15 through 17. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires, but whoever does the will of God abides forever. So here is the great irony of the promises that sin makes. You think you get to the very end of this passage, and John is saying, promises made, promises made, promises made. It's gonna feel good, and it's gonna look good, and it's gonna make you good. And John says, all these things that you're throwing your affections at, they're going to pass away. The most self-exalting people in all of history will pass away. I believe it was Voltaire who, if you've ever read Candide, as I read that in high school, Voltaire was quite an individual who hated Jesus vehemently. And Voltaire spent his life exalting himself, trying to tear down everything good about the Bible, church. He just made effort after effort after effort to make everything good look bad and everything bad look good. And on his deathbed, it's reported that he just raised his fist in anger and he cursed Christ on his deathbed. And Voltaire is dead. Everything Voltaire worked for has passed away and will pass away. And that's what John says here, is that if you follow after this thing, right, the promise is made. If you eat of it, you'll surely die, right? It says this to our first parents. Sin comes on the human race, and we are born with this disposition, this corruption of our heart. And John says, don't go after this. This will destroy you. This will wreck you. And it won't last longer than your own life. It is foolish. It is irrational. And it is not from God. So just a word there of caution, of warning, as we think about how do we function as Christian people. Please, please, please. Like, I think the biggest example of this is the celebrianity type of a thing, right? All that glitters is not gold. I'm going to finish this morning looking at 1 John chapter 3. As we think, if this is a big, big stinking mess, and it is a big stinking mess, and we want to direct our attention always then to the gospel to solve our problems, to deal with our problems, to give us hope, not because, hey, guess what, this week you're going to do a good job of not sinning. I hope you do a good job of not sinning this week, but it ain't going to be perfect. You're going to do something stupid this week, and so will I. The question is, how will I relate to this? How will you relate to this? How is it that I will see my sin this week in a way that is recognizing that something has been done in human history so that this pattern is not over and over and over and over realized in me to the very end of my life, to my own death and destruction? Here's what John says in 1 John 3. Everyone who makes a practice of sinning also practices lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness, right? It's just throwing off God's good rule. You know that he appeared, talking of Jesus, you know that Jesus appeared in order to take away sins, and in him there is no sin. No one who abides in him keeps on sinning. No one who keeps on sinning has either seen him or known him. Now, does this mean, again, that Christians are perfect people? It doesn't mean this. It does mean, though, that cherishing sin is completely inconsistent with the Christian experience. Just loving sin and saying, God's cool with that, doesn't work. You can't do it. The dam will break at some point. Right? I've been around long enough as a pastor and as a Christian to have seen how this happens in people's lives when they try to straddle both sides of this fence, and you're going to fall off. John says, no, nobody who's been given a new heart is ultimately going to love sin the way they did before. No one who abides in him keeps on sinning. No one who keeps on sinning has either seen him or known him. And then he speaks of these really tender words. Just hear tender words right now from the Lord through the Apostle John. Little children, let no one deceive you. Whoever practices righteousness is righteous as he is righteous. Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil. For the devil has been sinning from the beginning. Now pay attention to these words. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. We will hear in a couple of weeks this promise that God makes, that the seed of the woman will crush the serpent. It calls the first gospel, the proto-evangelium, the first gospel promise that's made, that one day the seed of a woman will come and crush the serpent's head. And so what I would encourage you this week is when sin is knocking at your door, when it's making its promises to you, you can't crush the serpent's head yourself. You can't do that. But what you can do is you can appeal to King Jesus. You can appeal to him who appeared to deal with sin. You can appeal to him who appeared so that the works of the devil might be destroyed and say, Jesus, I need help. I cannot do this. And I know you are a faithful and a merciful high priest. You endured temptation at every point, and yet you never sinned. So I can come to you and know that you have mercy for me and you have power for me to deal with this. And so as many promises as you will hear this week that sin will make as it knocks on your door, Jesus is able to deal with every single one of them. So please, little children, don't love the world, don't love the things in the world. These things are passing away. Love what is good. Love the God who made you. Love the God who designed you. Love the one who has given you new life so that you might pursue that which you were created for in the beginning. And then to see at the end of all things, there's this glorious restoration that will occur where every vestige of this mess will be taken away. All because he conquered sin and death.